webinar series. So today we have Jonathan Brown from the Consumer Action Law Centre. My name's Carly and I'm from Community Legal Centres Queensland. So I'll go through some short housekeeping and then hand over to Jonathan. So firstly, I'll just double check that everyone can hear. So if you could press the hand button on your control panel, so the little hand there. Let me know if you can hear. I can see some hands going up, so I presume that everyone is, everyone's on board and can hear us. That's fantastic. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are holding this webinar. So today in Brisbane, they are the Turrbal and the Yagara people. I wish to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our society. So we also have viewers around Queensland and the country, and Jonathan's actually presenting to us from Melbourne, I believe. So I'd like to acknowledge the First Australians across the country as well, and also acknowledge there's a lot more work to do in that space. So let's get started. So Jonathan will be speaking to us today about the language consumer advocates, CLCs and financial counsellors use and how we can improve our messaging about ourselves and about the people we help. In particular, Jonathan will talk about his report, People Who Help People, Compelling Narratives for Consumer Advocates and Financial Counsellors, and provide us with some practical tips. So I'll pass it over to you now, Jonathan.
All right, hello and welcome to the webinar. I go by JB as well, so you can call me Jonathan, you can call me JB. This has been a really exciting project for me to work on over the last year and a half. What I will say is that I haven't done a huge amount of slides, so I've put the webcam on so you can see my face and hopefully that's a bit more personable. I'm also going to bring a guest later on into the webinar, one of our staff members here at Consumer Action, to talk about what impacts the report has had on their work and what changes we've made over the last couple of years at Consumer Action and what it's like to make changes to language and culture within an organisation like ours. But I'm really looking forward to sharing what I've researched over the last year and a half, and particularly questions towards the end. Hopefully it raises a lot of questions for you, and there's some really practical things that I can put forward for you and your organisations, and make sure that the community legal sector, the community sector and financial counsellors, that we can take the work that we do and make it even more powerful, make it have even more impact in the community. That's what this is all about. It's about taking a sector and organisations that are already doing amazing work and making sure that people actually hear about it, that people access our services, that the right people are coming to our services, and that people like government and decision makers, that they know what we're doing and they support it as well. So that's really what this is all about. So this particular report, People Who Help People, came out of a fellowship I did with the organisation Australian Progress, and we worked with Anat Shenker-Osorio, who has a fantastic book called Don't Buy It, Stop Talking Nonsense About the Economy. And basically her job in the States is to work with progressive organisations to help them improve their messaging. So she will look at any range of progressive issues. It might be trying to get maternity leave for Americans. She's done quite a lot of work for unions and particularly issues for people in the workforce over there, looking at issues like climate change and how can we message about climate change and the environment in a way that cuts through. So I got the opportunity to do an intensive 12-week course with Anat. We did sessions just like this, actually, and got to explore a whole range of issues and how messaging has changed how people have perceived those problems and helped to solve those problems in an American context, but also an Australian context. And there were a number of us from around the country who worked together to help each other change the messaging on the issues that we're working in. So that ended up in the People Who Help People report. I did a significant amount of research into how Australians perceive financial distress, in particular, how they perceive people who are struggling with their finances, how our organisations market ourselves, and particularly how different that is compared to commercial services who try to muscle in on our space. How are they marketing themselves compared to us? And I found some really interesting things as a part of that process. So I'm going to go into our first slide, and hopefully as I click, it will change over and we can, just making sure that that is working for us. I love technology. Let's see how this goes. Carly, I might need your help to tell me whether this is coming up on the screen.
We can't see anything yet, so we can see you, but no PowerPoint.
Okay. Let's
there we go.
See how we... Oh, is that working?
Yep, we can see your whole screen. And that's it.
That's it. All right. Well, let's start with number one, which is show people how we make their lives better. Now, this particular tip came from a significant amount of research into how our organisations market themselves, but also how our commercial competitors market themselves. And I found some really interesting things as a result of that, particularly in the case of financial counselling. I came across what I like to call sad woman syndrome. Now, sad woman syndrome is where organisations in the not-for-profit and community sector market their services, whether it be on their website or whether it be on their pamphlets, by putting a big, large picture of a very sad woman out front. Now, the reason I raise that as an issue is if you contrast that with the commercial services that try to offer similar services to us, or try to get people who are in vulnerable positions and make money out of them, their marketing shows happy people. It shows people whose lives have been made better by accessing those services and by speaking to those people. If you contrast that with a lot of the marketing in the not-for-profit and community sector, you end up with either sad woman syndrome, or you end up with something that's really dull. It might be mostly text-based. It might be very rational. It might be long lists of the services that we provide. But if you go to commercial websites that offer similar services, you'll see that they show pictures of people who are happy and whose lives have been made better. And the assertion that those commercial services are making is that the person you're looking at is happier because they accessed our service. And this is effectively marketing 101. So when you are marketing your organisation or your service, you need to make people feel positive about accessing your service. If you don't make them feel positive about it, they will pick up your pamphlet or go to your website, and if they see that picture of the sad woman, then they go, I don't want to be that sad woman. I want to be happy. What you're doing is by posting a picture of someone sad to market your services, or by having a really boring website or boring pamphlet that doesn't show any human connection, you're actually drawing people away from your service and drawing them towards those commercial competitors that create a much rosier, much happier picture. So it's really important for us to show people how we make their lives better. So the photo that I've got on screen right now was a visit that one of our financial counsellors here at Consumer Action and I made to someone who we used to help out on our phones just about a year and a half ago. So we went to her house to get some photo, get some video, to see what her life was like a year and a half later. And things were so much better for her. Her life had really turned around from the experience she had while we were helping her. So what she was able to demonstrate for us is what the end result of contacting a financial counsellor and speaking to a financial counsellor was that her life was much better. We now have that video and those photos to demonstrate to people, hey, we can actually help make your lives better. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and that's really important. The next tip is, here we go, is to refer to people how they would refer to themselves. So one of the big issues that we have in our sector is language that's dehumanizing of people. And so when I say dehumanizing, I mean that there's often language that we might use in our offices which helps us to disconnect from our day-to-day work. And often we work with people who are in pretty dire and upsetting circumstances, and that can be quite hard on us. So sometimes we want to depersonalize people by calling them something like a client. The issue with that is that if you then use that language in your public marketing, people feel dehumanized by your marketing and then don't want to access your services. They don't identify with being a client. So that's one thing to be really conscious of, is how would people actually refer to themselves, and how do you identify as a person? And there's a few different ways that this can cause issues. And one of my pet hate words is the word consumer. Now, the word consumer, I recognize the irony in the fact that Consumer Action is called the Consumer Action Law Centre. I like to consider the word consumer to be a topic heading. It describes a field, it describes a topic, but it's not a descriptor word for people. Now, on this slide, you'll see that I've said, when you say the word consumer, they see this. And the concept we're talking about here is frames. So when we use particular words, we activate frames in people's minds. And so one word might set the context for the rest of your interaction with someone. So if, for example, I say to you, oh, this issue is really going to hurt consumers, what the word consumer does is it places people in the context of consumption. It places people in the context of retail, of spending, and that frame instantly puts people in a more selfish mindset. So what the studies tell us is that if you raise consumer as a topic, if you raise money as a topic, it instantly makes the audience that you're seeking more selfish and more individualistic. So by calling people consumers, you activate that individualist mindset. And that's really concerning for us who we might work within consumer issues, but actually what we do is social justice. If we activate these frames, then we're unfortunately working against ourselves. So that's really important to keep in mind, is that a word like consumer can activate really negative frames for the types of social issues that we're working in. So that's something really important to be conscious of, is we call people words like consumer or client in public forums, people don't identify with those terms. So one of my least favorite ones is talking about vulnerable consumers or vulnerable clients. People don't identify as a consumer and people don't identify as a client. So particularly in our work with a lot of the advocacy we do, if we go to government and we talk to people about vulnerable consumers, that's actually a get out of jail free card to not care about the people that we're talking about. The flip side to that is to talk about people as people, which is why I called the report People Who Help People, because we want to talk about people in the context of their lives. So if we use terms that people actually identify with, that's much more powerful. So when we're talking in a public context, we might talk about mums and dads and families. We might talk about farmers. Farmers is a really popular context where people really enjoy identifying as a farmer, and that's a really important part of their identity. So we might use some particular words to identify, but they have to be words that people actually identify with. And the words consumer and clients in a public context really dehumanize and create a disconnect. Now, the next one to focus on is about finding the right stories for the right audience. So there can be a bit of a tendency in our sector, and it's something that we've done a lot at Consumer Action in the past, is trying to speak to everyone at once. So we will often, in our past, have gone, okay, we want to warn people about a dodgy lender, a dodgy company, a dodgy lender, some kind of dodgy business. But in that same message, we're telling a story to the policymakers and government. We're also telling a story to the workers. We're also telling a story to people who are experiencing vulnerability. We're also trying to tell that story to people who are middle class and quite well educated. But Consumer Action in the past, we would often try to achieve that with the one article or the one fact sheet on our website and try to speak to all of those audiences at once. And it just doesn't work. You really need to tell the right story for the right audience, and that involves using the right language for the audience that you're trying to reach. It involves using the right medium. So we might put something up on our website, but is someone who is on a low income and experiencing vulnerability in their life, do they even have affordable, accessible access to the internet? Well, that fact sheet on our website isn't going to help them at all. But sometimes we do these things out of habit. We go, oh yeah, we need to educate the public, so let's put something on our website. When our website might not actually be the best tool for doing that. So it's about constantly questioning, constantly coming back to, okay, who is the audience I'm trying to reach? What's the message that I'm trying to get to that audience? And what's going to be the best tool or channel to reach that audience? So that's a really important thing to constantly question around your office, particularly anything to do with public education, trying to get information out to the people that we serve. How do we make sure that we are actually reaching them? And it's important to ask those questions and not take for granted that putting something on our website or putting something on our social media pages will reach people. We need to think really carefully about making sure that we target and speak in the right tone for the right audience. The next hot tip, number 4, is the concept of rationality versus emotion. So I want to tell you a story about a university in the United States that took two sets of students, all in the same class. They split the class in half. Now, what they wanted the class to do was to come up with a solution for crime in a fictional city. Half the class were given the metaphor of crime as a beast. So a lot of the language was about crime as this beastly, scary thing, but actually the facts of the crime were exactly the same. The other half of the class, they gave them the metaphor of crime as a virus. All of the facts exactly the same between this university class. What they found when they surveyed that class afterwards was that the students who received crime as a beast were much more likely to be punitive in their response to crime. They were much more likely to say, that's right, lock them up, put them in jail and throw away the key. The students who received the metaphor of crime as a virus were much more likely to be preventative and to take a community approach to the problem. So that's quite scary. All that changed was the metaphor. The facts about crime in this fictional city were exactly the same, but the students across age groups, across the political spectrum, the metaphor was the difference in how they responded to the issue of crime. So that was a really scary insight from the research, was that if we choose the wrong metaphors when talking about a social issue, talking about our issues, we can have an actual practical impact on how people respond. And that can be either a really positive impact or a really negative impact. So it's really important for us to remember that rationality, presenting people the facts, it is important for us to be fact-based. Of course, that's what our sector does. We base what we do off of actual evidence, and we want to make sure that our work is impactful. So we actually do the legwork in making sure that we're backed up in the work that we do. But unfortunately, people are impacted by emotions. We can't rely on rationality to save the day, because ultimately people don't make their decisions off the basis of rationality. I like to say that we as a sector are irrationally addicted to rationality, because unfortunately the evidence is there that purely presenting people rational arguments doesn't work, that emotions and using people's emotional triggers is a much more effective way of getting change to happen. We have the rational evidence that tells us that, but we keep telling ourselves that the facts will save the day, and if we present people the facts, then the facts will fix the problem. But we can't switch off from the emotional side of things. It's very important to make sure that everything is grounded in people and people's lives, and that we think really carefully about the emotions that we're triggering and what we're activating in people's minds with the language that we use. Our next tip is about being confident about our work and our values. So what I've written in the report is that we're bloody great. It's time we started acting like it. If you look at a lot of our websites or strategic plans or annual reports or pamphlets promoting what we do, the way we market ourselves, we often don't tell people that we're great and we're really good at the job we do. And again, back to what I was talking about before, that really has an impact on our services and whether people approach our services. And it's definitely something that we can learn from commercial competitors to what we do, is that they're more than willing to trumpet their praises and make sure that they're recognised for the good work that we do. But in the community sector, there's almost a lack of confidence in being able to say that our organisations are great, and you should trust us. You should feel comfortable and confident working with us or accessing our services. So hedging is one of the terms that comes up in this space. And hedging is the language that you use to not really be very direct. So say, for example, there's a big difference between you will win this case and you may win this case. Obviously, a lawyer is highly unlikely to ever say you will win this case. And so an example of hedging is using language to soften that a little bit and say you may win this case. But when that hedging bleeds into your brand and your values, you really come across as unsure and as though you're lacking confidence. So the best example of this is in mission statements for organisations. One that often would come up for us is we might say something like, we seek to improve consumer law in Australia. And the question there is, well, does your organisation seek to improve consumer law, or does your organisation actually improve consumer law? By using those words seek to, you are hedging. You are making the audience reading that sentence go, oh, do they actually achieve it? Do they actually achieve that thing they say what they're doing? So it's really important to be confident about our organisations and about our values, because that really impacts whether people access our services, whether governments fund us. We have to be really careful about language about our organisations that gets in the way of our confidence. The next hot tip is about controlling our own stories. So I spoke before about frames. You may notice Catherine Temple has jumped in.
Hello.
We'll be chatting to her in a moment. But controlling our story is another interesting one. It's really important to think again about the frames that we activate when we are talking about particular social issues and what we're activating in people's brains as they consider the work that we do and the issues that we work in. So one of the biggest problems for us at Consumer Action is how we in the community talk about the economy. And this is what I learned from Anat Shenker-Osorio and throughout the fellowship, is that a lot of the ways that we talk about the economy really work against those of us seeking social justice and working in social justice. So one of the most problematic frames for us is this idea of the economy as though it's a living being or an organism. So you'll often hear language about the growth of the economy and, oh no, you can't hurt the economy. And they make it sound as though the economy is a grand old tree that we need to just leave be, because nature is beautiful and the economy is this beautiful natural thing that you should just leave alone and let it be, or as if it's some kind of living creature that we have to be really careful not to intervene with and not to harm. And that works against us, because at Consumer Action in particular, we believe that there actually should be regulations in the economy. We should actually look after people in our economy, and that the economy isn't something that should just be left to do whatever it pleases. It shouldn't be a Wild West. It should actually be regulated in some way. But that metaphor that constantly comes up of the economy as a living being or as an organism of some sort works against our aims as an organisation. So the research from Anat Shenker-Osorio has shown that when you use metaphors of the economy as a shared journey, as though it is a car ride, people on the roads together, it's much more beneficial for those of us who are coming at economic issues with a social justice bent, because on the road, there have to be road rules. When you're on a journey together, you have to be able to share the road with other cars. You have a journey, you have a place to go with each other. And that metaphor allows us to regulate the economy and regulate businesses and make sure that they're doing the right thing by everyone on the road. But that metaphor of the economy as a living being or organism is very anti-interventionist and says that we should leave it alone, and is very anti-regulation. So that's just one example of how we really need to flip that story and control our own story, is when it comes to talking about the economy, really making sure we're conscious of the language choices that we use. Now, when I say using these metaphors, talking about the economy as a living being or an organism, or talking about being on the road, we don't necessarily use those metaphors in a really obvious way, or it can come across sounding a bit ham-fisted, but they're often really subtle. So when people are using that economy as a living being metaphor, they're just talking about the economy being hurt. They're not saying literally the economy is human flesh and you are hurting it. You will talk about in terms of the economy as being hurt, and that activates in people's minds that it is a living thing. But you know, if we switch to this metaphor of the economy as a shared journey and as like being on the road, we can use some of those metaphors of being on a journey together, of having rules that work for us all, of having speed limits, of having acceptable limits. The choice of metaphor is really important in that sense. So I do have the ultimate cheat sheet for consumer advocates and financial counsellors, which shows us just some of the key sorts of language that really works for us and works against us. And so this is based off of some of the research we've had here in Australia from different social causes, some of the research from America as well. And let's go through a couple of those examples. So I already mentioned the word consumer is one of my least favorite words, even though I'm from Consumer Action Law Centre. What we want to do is we want to talk about people in the context of their lives. We want to use terms that people would call themselves. So we call them families, Australians, in our case, Victorians, mums, dads. These are terms that people would actually call themselves. So if we go out on the TV news tonight and we talk about how, you know, mums just want to be able to put food on the table tonight for their kids, and this decision by maybe an energy company is really going to hurt them, you can picture in your mind that mum who can't feed her kids that night. Whereas if we went on the TV news tonight and said, oh yes, this decision by this energy company is really going to hurt consumers, that activates that frame of consumers and makes people think about shopping, makes people think about money, makes people think about people in a shopping centre. So it's really important to use those terms that people would actually use themselves. Another one is people who are hurt by predatory business, as opposed to talking about vulnerable consumers or vulnerable clients. And the reason for that is people don't identify as consumers, people don't identify as clients. And the reason we say people hurt by predatory business is we actually have to put blame on who is doing this. People aren't hurt by a product. People aren't hurt by a payday loan. They're hurt by the person who has decided to run that business, who has decided to run a business based off of a business model of hurting people. Someone has chosen to hurt these people. It isn't something that's just magically happened. People have been actively hurt by a predatory business and the people who run that business. So I've already spoken about the word clients. We're talking about shifting to language that gives people more agency in their lives and removes some of that clinical expectation that comes out of clients. So some people find problematic the people we serve and activating a service frame. So it might be talking about the people that we work with. So at Consumer Action, we're often talking about the people we work with as opposed to clients.
Or people who call us.
Yeah.
People we help.
Yeah, or people we help.
Yeah.
because that gives them agency and it treats them as people in the context of their lives. It doesn't treat them as clients. And another of my most hated examples in the sector is the idea of debtors, defining people by the fact that they are in debt. It's really important to flip those sentences and actually talk about people. So they are people who are in debt. They're not debtors. Don't define their entire lives by being a debtor, because what the language research tells us is that if you define people by that thing, that is all your audience will think about them. So if you call them a debtor, the audience reading or consuming your message will just think of them in the context of their debt. They will forget that they have a family to feed. They will forget that they are a person who might be struggling with addiction or have other things going on in their lives. It's really important not to define people by things like debt. So I'm going to introduce right now Catherine Temple, who is one of our senior policy officers here at Consumer Action. My understanding is you will be able to see both of us on the screen if you click on the webcam. So good luck with that. I hope you can see Catherine and I up here on the screen now. So Catherine is our senior policy officer who works on everything. Catherine works on everything from payday loans to credit cards, the conduct of banks, lenders, retirement villages, which has been quite prominent on Four Corners and in the Fairfax newspapers of late. And so I wanted to chat to you because you've been at Consumer Action for a couple of years now. We've been working on this language work for a while now. What do you think has changed in the last couple of years since we've done this research? And what's changed in practice for you?
I think we've definitely started using the word people more. And I know it sounds really basic, but when I first started, we talked a lot about consumers and vulnerable and disadvantaged consumers. And I think it was really easy for the people we were speaking to kind of discount that or not be able to relate to it, because you don't relate, particularly policymakers and politicians, they just didn't relate to it at all because they don't see themselves as a consumer or particularly as a vulnerable or disadvantaged consumer. So I think we use words like people and families and Australians and things a lot more in our media work, but also even in our submissions. I mean, there are some audiences where you should say consumer, but generally we don't anymore. Yeah.
So you mentioned media there. You're one of our media stars. I'm often putting you in front of TV news cameras, and you're often having to sell a message about a really serious social issue.
Yeah.
Can you think of any that we've worked on where you have changed how you've used your language, or you've changed how you've thought about the way you speak about it?
Yeah, I think I'll give one example. So today I did an interview with a current affair on credit cards. And once upon a time, we would have talked a lot about how balance transfer deals can harm consumers, that consumers can be caught off guard, things like that. But the language has changed to more, banks are targeting people struggling with debt. Talking about people with debt, not debtors, but yeah, people who have plenty of other things going on in their lives, who are sort of being taken advantage of by the banks. So kind of putting blame on who really is causing the harm here. Yeah.
And it is really easy to forget about who is actually making these decisions to sell these products. They know that the people who they're selling to are often in dire circumstances, but in that old language that we used to use, we kind of dehumanized the banks in a bad way, in the sense that we took the blame away from them for their crappy business decisions.
And I think we fed into the frame, and I don't think we meant to, but we did, by calling them consumers and talking about the frame that people should protect their own interests, and if people were just more informed, then we'd all make better decisions. And I think by not pointing the finger and talking about people as they talk about themselves, we kind of fed into that frame a little bit. So I think we've come a long way in using much more relatable language, but also identifying, where the harm is coming from, who caused it, rather than just talking about it as this abstract kind of concept that sort of magically happened, that the banks have been targeting these deals at people who they know will never be able to, repay their balances. So, so we've come a long way for sure. Yeah.
What about, I was talking before about this concept of rationality versus emotion, and you're often working in fields where we need to convince a government or convince policymakers or try to drum up a campaign to get something changed. What's your perspective on the balance between presenting rational arguments, but also remembering what the decision maker is actually influenced by? How do you balance that in your role, and how do you frame messages for that?
Yeah, it's really difficult, and I think it depends on your audience, because some of our audiences are not so swayed by the human stories. Some really want data and rational kind of economic theory and things like that. And so I think the first step is understanding who you're talking to and what they'll respond to. And that's not to say that if you're dealing with someone who likes rational economic theory that you shouldn't use human stories. It's just realizing that if you lay that on too thick, you may end up alienating them. But for the vast majority, they actually respond better to human stories than facts and figures a lot of the time. When you can actually show the harm and an example and give a whole picture of someone's life and show all the other things that are happening. So I think understanding your audience is really important, but also not letting kind of the conversation and the frame go the way that they necessarily want it to. If that makes sense. Yeah. And
a lot of our work now is encouraging people to share their stories and supporting people to share their stories. Has that changed in your time at Consumer Action, how we've gone about getting people to share stories and getting those out there? I think absolutely. We've done a lot more work, I think, in supporting people to tell their own story, but we've also changed how we told people's stories. So when I first started, we would write a submission and we would do a case study, and we would say, case study 1. And then we would say, this client came to us with this problem and we fixed it by doing this, and the business charged them X amount of dollars. Whereas now we will give the person a name, doesn't have to be their real name, but we'll say Sonia's story as the title. And then we'll say, Sonia is a single mum with 2 kids, and she didn't have enough money to pay her power bill, so she went to a payday lender. And then, at the same time, she just lost her job or something. Like, we're telling the story of the person and the impact it had on them. So, Sonia said that she felt really overwhelmed and, really betrayed by the lender because, she thought that they pretended they were there to help her or something, which to a lawyer or, perhaps numbers people, those details don't seem important. But when you're trying to influence someone, I think the more human aspect is really important, and we use that more now. I think the emotion and the backstory doesn't need to be War and Peace, but it's just taking away the focus from just the pure numbers and calling people clients and things like that. And I think that's a really interesting example is that simple switch of going from saying our client had this happen to them to, if they don't want to be identified, calling them something like Jenny.
Yeah.
And giving a little bit of detail. It might be Jenny, who is a 30-year-old mother of 2 from Broadmeadows.
Yeah.
That little bit of detail just paints a little bit more of a picture in the head of the person taking it in. But if we just say client.
Yeah, and most people are pretty happy. I mean, because we get consent, obviously, before we use anyone's stories, whether they're de-identified or not. But most people are pretty happy if you don't use their name to kind of use those few details and paint a picture of their life. So it hasn't really changed if anything, it's made it easier, but it certainly hasn't made it any harder getting people to, say okay to us using their stories.
Yeah. All right, well, I wanted to leave a decent amount of time for questions, and I've asked Catherine, she's kindly agreed that she can answer any questions as well about how she's implemented this thinking of language and narrative in her work. So I'm actually ready to go for questions, if you are.
All right, so I'll just remind everyone that there are two ways you can ask questions. You can press the button that looks like a hand. We'll see a hand go up at our end, and we can unmute you so you can ask your question via the microphone. Or there's the easier way, you can type your question straight into the question box on the control panel, and we'll read all of your questions out, and our lovely presenters will be able to answer those questions. So we'll give everyone a little bit of time to start sending your questions through. We don't have any yet, but we do have 10 minutes or so. So it's a great chance to get those questions answered about how your people can be framed in a more positive light to funders, to the community, and you can tell their story in a really positive way. So got a question about the webinar being available. I should have mentioned at the start that we're recording the webinar, so there will be a recording up on the CLCQ website within the next couple of days, and I'll send out the link to everyone who's registered so you can view that recording. I know that a couple of people have had some problems with sound, so we do apologise for that. Hopefully it's all been recorded, so you'll be able to check back on there in the next couple of days. So I've got a question here. So some of our centres, obviously not all CLCs deal with consumer issues. Some of them deal with other kinds of issues such as domestic violence matters and family law matters. So the question is, would it still be appropriate to show happy, smiling people on your CLC's website if you're dealing in those areas of law that can sort of, I guess it may feel a little bit yucky to put a happy, smiling face when you know that that's such a touchy subject area. So what do you guys think about that? Have you got any expertise to share?
Yeah, I think particularly in financial counselling, there's a bit of ickiness about showing happy people, because we go, oh, we're dealing with people who are in a significant amount of debt and they don't feel happy. And I think it's a bit of a habit for us to go show the people who are having a bad time. But say, for example, something with family violence, it might not be cheesy, happy people, but you might show the mum who is a couple of years down the track and is with her kids and her life is better. You might not choose the cheesy photos and the cheesy over-the-top imagery, but it is really important to make people feel good about accessing your services. So one flip side of that is maybe if you don't want to show the people who access the services as much, and this is something a lot of commercial law firms actually do quite well, is they show the lawyers in their law firms looking really kind. And they might show photos of them doing a consultation with one of the people they work with, and their imagery will show them as a really lovely person. So if you want to shy away from showing the people themselves, then it's actually really important to show you in your offices as nice, kind, happy, approachable people. A bit of a habit in our sector of having like people standing in offices looking really serious, or with the headset on looking really serious, and that doesn't attract people to your services. So it's about balance.
Yeah, I think, and I missed the start obviously, but when you look at businesses and how they market themselves, they market you kind of hope, I guess, and what you want to be at the end of the road.
Mm.
You know, so we see it all the time with debt management firms. You know, they're actually marketing this vision of you looking happy and debt-free and stress-free, and you know, that's really appealing. And so to kind of compete with that, we sort of have to, yeah, show the good bit at the end.
Mm.
Yeah, but I think your idea of balance is good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Thank you. So I've got another question here. Do you have feedback from the people that you've helped who've used your services pre and post these language changes?
We've had a lot of anecdotal feedback, but unfortunately we haven't had the chance to do a proper research project comparing then and now. But we are getting a lot of nice anecdotal feedback that people are finding the messaging a lot kinder and a lot friendlier.
We're definitely getting more media requests.
Yeah, absolutely. That would probably be one of the bigger signs of that, is that because our storytelling has improved, the media industry is coming to us a lot more for stories and approaching us a lot more because of that focus on storytelling and having a better narrative. I have our media phone and I just kind of get calls non-stop nowadays. So in that sense, we're seeing a lot more feedback, but also particularly from policymakers and from government. We've had quite a few trips to Canberra in the last couple of years, and our Director of Policy and Campaigns will often take an iPad with someone's video story. And if we can't get a person who's actually experienced a problem to Canberra, we'll take a video of that person's story to Canberra with them. And we have had some strong feedback that bringing those stories directly to decision makers and bringing it in different formats. Sometimes it's written, sometimes it's video or audio. We have had strong feedback that that's quite effective in influencing them. Any other questions?
Yes, we've just got a couple more questions that have come through. So this one is, we have our client service charter, clients' rights and responsibilities, complaints procedure documentation, accessible all in the consultation rooms, in the hope that people who visit our service will know it exists and feel confident about accessing our services. However, the language is not very engaging. Do you have any tips for such formal documentation? So talking about things like charter.
Yeah, I think for one, you know, trying to remove the word client wherever possible. So, you know, instead of a document saying client rights and responsibilities, it could just say your rights and responsibilities and address people directly. The other thing is, you know, to add a bit of design and actually include some imagery with those forms, with those documents, so that, you know, you can see the happy, you know, happy smiley people. And again, you might not want to go over the top and have, you know, people with cheesy happy grins, but actually having some imagery alongside those documents. We often underestimate the power of design and how design makes people feel.
Some colour.
Yeah, design, some colour.
Some dot points.
It's actually, design is really important in public-facing documents and making sure that people can see themselves in the documents. And one of the easiest ways to do it is to actually test it out with some of those audiences. You know, you can invite 3 or 4 people who come from that audience that you're trying to appeal to, get them in a room, put on some muffins and coffee or something, and just present them some of your documents, get them to read it through with you and get some feedback as to what appeals to you about this document, what doesn't work so well, what could we do better. It's possible to do smaller focus groups that can help you work on those documents and make sure the language is more accessible.
I'll just add, so I used to be a lawyer, so I came from a legal background, not a sort of design and comms background. So I can kind of understand with these formal documents, I mean, obviously there are legal messages and rights and responsibilities that you need to get across. But I think a lot of the way we write things is habit. And, you know, there's obviously been a plain English movement in law for a long time, but I think, you know, less is definitely more, and design and sort of imagery is really important. And I think you can do that and still get the necessary legal bits and pieces across in the same document.
Yeah, I spend a lot of my time cutting unnecessary words out. That is probably my #1 thing, is most of the documents that are originally drafted by lawyers, and that's no offense to any legal friends, is that I've been able to cut a whole bunch of documents that have been presented to me in half without actually ruining any of the legal status or legal accuracy of those documents. And it's just habit. It's habit to use more words than we need, but volume of words is another big one.
Okay. Got some good tips there. One last question that's come through. So this is from a health organisation. They've already undergone some terminology changes. They went from calling everyone patients, now they've moved to calling everyone consumers. Don't know if that's really much of an improvement based on your presentation. So the question is, how do you deal with an organisation that now has this embedded? So they've been using consumers for the last 2 years.
Gradual change.
Yeah, we've just had to do it slowly.
Yeah.
And it's been a mix. As the communications manager here, I just haven't been able to be gung-ho about it and like set rules and say, everyone, you must speak like this now. It's been very gradual over the last couple of years, and a mix, you know, explaining to people the rational reasons for why our language needs to change, but also showing them emotionally, showing them examples of the difference, rewriting things with people, and actually show it, I guess, leading by example as much as possible. And very much, a lot of it's been about getting our CEO on board with the language change. You know, as the CEO of the organisation, he's out there speaking publicly. He's out there speaking with our staff every day. So yeah, it's about making it as visible as possible. So I made this report and I made the cheat sheet so that everyone could stick it up on their desks and be reminded. But also, it's just putting absolute terror and fear into my co-workers' lives, because I must admit, we do sit in meetings every now and then, and if someone says one of the words that I don't like, there's a bit of a in the room because someone said one of the bad words. In a joking way, we react like that sometimes. It's gradual change, and I think people need to see the difference that it makes. Need to see that it actually does make a change.
And so a lot of some of our shift came from when we redid our strategic plan. I think so. We changed a lot of the language we used around, you know, what our values were and sort of our mission statement, I guess, and you know, how we wanted to talk about ourselves and our clients. And I mean, we only do that every 3 years, I think. So, you know, it was sort of gradual, and we had JB sort of encouraging us to change how we wrote and spoke, but, you know, without making people too uncomfortable. And then when we got to the strategic plan stage, I think we were all, you know, we all understood the benefits and you know, we're comfortable enough with it that we were then able to put it into more formal documentation and embed it a bit more. I think, but it's definitely gradual. Yeah.
All right, last question that's come through, and this is probably the last one we will have time for. So we've got a question here. What do you think of the use of the term customer used by service providers to describe participants under the NDIS? So, they're sticking to it as if it's their obligation to do so, but, there's a lot of resistance to that term. What do you think of that one, customer?
I think well, from a policy angle, I think it feeds into kind of the narrative about, purchase power and competition and consumer choice, and them all being, that all being really great things, and kind of trying to disconnect from the more human side of these kinds of services. So I think it's I'm not sure I love the word, to be honest. But if that's how, what they're being directed to call people, I mean, I don't know whether there's much that can be done. I mean, from the sector's perspective, though, you can talk about people not as customers, but as people, regardless of what the providers are saying.
I mean, like, in terms of the word clients, I don't wrap people on the knuckles around the office for using the word client around the office. But if they use it in any public communications, or they use it to describe someone to their face, then that's an absolute no-no. But for the word clients in our services and for the people doing it, I absolutely get that for our financial counsellors who spend day in, day out hearing people's problems, hearing people's sad stories and issues in their lives, that for them to depersonalise a little bit by, in the office, calling them a client, I actually get that that serves a useful purpose. But in public communications, referring to people by a term like client is just so dehumanising. And flipping to the word customer, I think it does activate those frames of treating people as a product.
And shoppers.
And shoppers and treating people, it definitely activates some very problematic frames, and we need to think about people in the context of their lives. No one cares about a customer getting hurt, but you care about your brother, your sister, your friend, your mum, your dad. You care about them being hurt by bad behaviour or a business doing the wrong thing, or them not getting access to disability services. You care if that person is described in terms that mean something to you, but a customer just means nothing to me.
I think, but JB makes a good point that internally, technical language and calling people clients or whatever is not necessarily a bad thing, because we all use shortcuts and technical language internally, and when we're speaking with colleagues, because it's the language we know and it makes our jobs quicker and easier, and so there is a place for that. But I think definitely the public-facing documents and media statements and things, I think words like customer are problematic.
Excellent. Well, no more questions have come through, so thank you so much for your time this afternoon and for sharing what you've learned. And I think there's some really valuable lessons that, in a nice, easy to digest way, that CLCs and workers here can start to implement, perhaps slowly, within their organisations. And certainly for any comms people out there listening, I think you're probably well and truly, hopefully, already on board with this, but just good reminders and good tips out there. So thank you so much. And we're getting some thank yous from the audience, so that's wonderful. Lovely to meet you guys, and we'll see you all next time at the next webinar. Just another reminder that this one will be up on our website in a couple of days, and I'll send out a link soon. Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Thank you.
See you.